It was a chilly Monday morning, and the courthouse buzzed with its usual mix of tension and activity. People hurried in and out, some clutching folders filled with documents, others looking nervous as they waited for their cases to be called. Among them stood a tall black woman dressed professionally in a sharp blazer and slacks. She had an air of calmness about her, but there was also something firm in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence that made people glance twice. Officer Greg Thompson pushed open the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. He'd been on duty since early dawn, responding to calls and handling routine patrols. Now he found himself here, tasked with maintaining order inside this busy building. With over 15 years of experience under his belt, Greg prided himself on being tough, yet fair, or so he thought. Today, however, would challenge everything he believed about his role as a police officer. As Greg scanned the hallway, his eyes landed on the woman standing near the entrance. She wasn't doing anything wrong, just waiting patiently. But something about her presence caught his attention. Maybe it was how still she stood while everyone else moved around frantically. Or maybe it was simply because she didn't look away when their eyes met. Whatever it was, Greg felt compelled to approach. Ma'am, he said sharply, his tone louder than necessary. You can't loiter here. Move along. The woman turned toward him slowly, meeting his gaze without flinching. There was no hint of fear or anger in her expression, just curiosity. She held up a folder containing what looked like official papers. I'm waiting for my case to be called, she explained calmly. These are my court documents. Greg frowned. Something about her response irritated him. Maybe it was the way she spoke, so composed, almost too confident for someone being addressed by an authority figure. He expected deference, maybe even a little nervousness, but instead, he got nothing but cool assurance. It rattled him more than he cared to admit. This area is restricted, he insisted, raising his voice slightly. If you're not actively involved in proceedings right now, you need to leave. A few heads turned at the sound of his raised voice. Some passers-by paused mid-step, curious about the exchange unfolding before them. Others whispered quietly, among themselves, exchanging glances as if silently asking, "What's going on here?" The woman didn't back down. Instead, she took a step closer, not aggressively, but deliberately. Her voice remained steady as she replied, "Officer, I understand your concern, but I am following protocol. My case is scheduled shortly, and I'm entitled to wait here until then." Her words seemed reasonable enough, but Greg wasn't interested in reason. All he could focus on was the growing number of people watching them. The last thing he wanted was for anyone to think he couldn't handle a simple situation like this, so instead of backing off, he doubled down. "You need to show some respect," he barked, his voice carrying down the corridor. A nearby security guard glanced over, sensing trouble brewing. Even the woman blinked once, surprised by the sudden escalation. But she quickly recovered, her composure unshaken. "Respect is earned." "Officer," she said firmly, holding his gaze. "Not demanded." Those words hit Greg like a punch to the gut. They weren't shouted or delivered with malice. They were spoken softly but with undeniable conviction. For a moment he faltered, unsure of what to say next. His mind raced, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. Without thinking, he reached for the most intimidating tool in his arsenal: authority. "I'm placing you under arrest for obstructing justice," he declared loudly, hoping the weight of those words would finally make her comply. But it didn't work. If anything, his threat only drew more attention. Phones came out recording the scene as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Is this really necessary?" Another person shook their head disapprovingly. And somewhere in the chaos, Greg realized he might have made a mistake. But it was too late to undo it now. Unbeknownst to Greg, this encounter was about to become far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Because the woman standing in front of him wasn't just another face in the crowd, she was Detective Inspector Maya Rivers, a highly respected figure within the law enforcement community, and soon she'd be making headlines in ways neither of them anticipated. For now, though, all Greg could see was a standoff. one that left him feeling increasingly cornered as bystanders captured every word and gesture on camera. Little did he know, these recordings would spread faster than wildfire, sparking conversations across the city, and ultimately leading to a revelation that would change both their lives forever. The tension between the officer and the woman was thick enough to cut with a knife. The hallway, once filled with the usual hum of murmured conversations and shuffling feet, had grown eerily quiet. All eyes were on them now. Some people stopped, walking all together while others lingered nearby, pretending to check their phones but secretly watching the scene unfold. It was clear that this wasn't just a routine interaction. It was escalating into something much bigger. The woman stood, her ground calm but firm. Her voice never wavered as she responded to the officer's accusations. "Obstructing justice?" she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. "I'm standing here waiting for my case to be called. How is that obstruction?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. She wasn't yelling or raising her voice. She didn't need to. Her composure spoke volumes, and it seemed to only fuel the officer's frustration. He clenched his jaw, gripping the handcuffs at his side like they were some kind of lifeline. "I've given you plenty of chances to cooperate," he shot back, his voice louder now, almost booming in the confined space. "But you're refusing to follow instructions. That's not how this works." A few people in the crowd exchanged uneasy glances. One older man leaned over to his companion and whispered, "Doesn't look like she's doing anything wrong to me." His friend nodded, slowly, clearly unsure of what to make of the situation. Others whispered too, their voices low but unmistakably critical of the officer's behavior. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she took another step forward, not aggressively, but deliberately. She held up the folder again, showing him the court papers one more time. "These documents prove I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said evenly. "If you'd like, we can go inside and confirm with the clerk. But arresting me for simply waiting here? That doesn't seem fair or legal." Her logic was unshakable, and it threw the officer off balance. For a moment he hesitated. Maybe it was the way she looked him straight in the eye, unwavering and steady. Or maybe it was the growing number of spectators recording the entire exchange on their phones. Whatever it was, he felt exposed, vulnerable even. And when people feel cornered, they often lash out. "This isn't about your papers," he snapped, his face reddening. "This is about respecting authority. You're undermining the rules, and I won't tolerate it." His words echoed through the corridor, bouncing off the walls and drawing even more attention. A young woman holding a toddler stepped closer, shaking her head disapprovingly. "That poor lady hasn't done anything," she muttered under her breath. Nearby, a teenager filming the scene zoomed in on the officer's face, capturing every flicker of emotion. By now, the security guards stationed near the entrance had noticed the commotion. Two of them approached cautiously, trying to assess whether they needed to intervene. One of them, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor, spoke up. "Is everything okay here, officer?" he asked, his tone neutral but probing. The officer turned toward the guard, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Everything's fine," he barked, "just handling a situation." But the guard wasn't convinced. He glanced at the woman, then back at the officer. "Ma'am, do you need assistance?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, thank you, I'm fine. This is just unfortunate." Unfortunate. That single word carried so much weight. It summed up the absurdity of the situation. The fact that someone who hadn't broken any rules was being treated like a criminal simply because an officer couldn't handle being questioned. The officer, realizing he was losing control of the narrative, tried one last tactic. "Fine," he said gruffly, lowering his voice slightly. "If you're not going to move, I'll have to escort you out myself. Let's go." He reached for her arm, but she pulled back instinctively, taking a small step away from him. "Don't touch me," she said firmly, her voice still calm, but carrying an edge of warning. That did it. The crowd stirred, murmurs turning into outright protests. Someone shouted, "Leave her alone." Another person added, "What's wrong with you? She hasn't done anything." The officer froze, his hand hovering mid-air. He looked around, suddenly aware of how many people were watching and judging his every move. For the first time, since the confrontation began, doubt crept into his mind. Was he overreacting? Had he let his ego get the better of him? Before he could answer those questions, the security guard stepped in. "Officer, perhaps it's best if we all take a step back," the senior guard suggested diplomatically. "Let's resolve this peacefully." Reluctantly, the officer lowered his arm. He muttered something under his breath, though no one could quite catch what it was. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked off down the hallway, leaving behind a trail of awkward silence. For a moment, no one moved. The woman stood there, clutching her folder tightly, her expression unreadable. Finally, the security guard addressed her. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She nodded, exhaling deeply. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you." As the crowd slowly dispersed, returning to their own business, the gravity of what had just happened settled over everyone. Phones continued to record, capturing the aftermath of the confrontation. Videos would soon flood social media platforms, sparking debates about fairness, respect, and the role of authority. But none of that mattered to the officer. Not yet, anyway. As he retreated to the far end of the courthouse, his mind raced with thoughts of damage control. What had started as a minor issue had spiraled into something far beyond his control. And unbeknownst to him, the real storm was only beginning. Within hours, news of the incident would reach higher-ups in the department, and the fallout would change his life forever. Back at the police station, things were buzzing with a strange energy. Officers milled about in the break room, sipping coffee and swapping stories from their shifts. The usual chatter filled the air, jokes about traffic stops, complaints about paperwork, and lighthearted teasing between colleagues. But today there was an undercurrent of anticipation. Everyone knew something big was coming. They just didn't know what. Commissioner Lewis walked into the briefing room, his face unreadable. He carried himself with the kind of authority that demanded attention without needing to say a word. As he stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. Even the rowdiest officers stopped talking and turned their focus toward him. This wasn't going to be another routine update. That much was clear. "Good morning, everyone," Commissioner Lewis began, his voice steady but firm. "I've called this meeting because we have some important news to share. It's time for a change, not just within our department, but in how we serve this community." The words hung heavy in the air. Change. That single word could mean so many things, and no one quite knew where this was headed yet. Some officers exchanged nervous glances, while others sat up straighter, intrigued by the possibility of new leadership or reforms. "As you all know," the commissioner continued, "recent events have highlighted areas where we need improvement. Trust is earned, not given freely. And right now, trust between us and the people we protect is fragile. We need someone who can bridge that gap. Someone who understands fairness, integrity, and accountability." A murmur rippled through the room. People leaned forward in their seats, curiosity piqued. Who could the commissioner possibly be talking about? Speculation ran wild. Was it someone already on the force? Or would they bring in an outsider? "And so," Commissioner Lewis said, pausing for dramatic effect, "after careful consideration and consultation with higher authorities, I am pleased to announce that Detective Inspector Maya Rivers will take over as Chief of Police, effective immediately." The room exploded into whispers. Some officers gasped audibly while others nodded approvingly. Maya Rivers wasn't just a name. She was a legend within the department, known for her sharp mind, unwavering ethics, and ability to connect with both her team and the community. She had earned respect across the board. Her promotion made sense, but it also came with its own set of challenges. For Greg Thompson, however, the announcement hit like a ton of bricks. Sitting near the back of the room, he froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Memories of earlier that day flooded back: the courthouse, the confrontation, the humiliating exchange caught on camera. His stomach churned as realization dawned. That woman, she's my new boss. His heart sank as panic set in. How could he have been so blind, so reckless? In that moment, he wasn't just embarrassed, he was terrified. What if someone connected the dots? What if the footage of their altercation made its way upstairs? Would his career be over before he even had a chance to explain himself? As the commissioner wrapped up the meeting, congratulating Maya on her appointment and outlining plans for reform, Greg barely heard a word. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. He imagined colleagues mocking him behind closed doors, videos of the incident spreading online, headlines painting him as the villain. Every second felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, outside the station, social media was ablaze. Footage of the courthouse confrontation had gone viral within hours. Viewers dissected every frame, debating whether the officer's actions were justified or completely out of line. Comments ranged from outrage to disbelief, with hashtags like Justice for Maya trending nationwide. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing clips alongside interviews with witnesses who described the scene in vivid detail. It was wild, one bystander told a reporter. She wasn't doing anything wrong, and he just kept pushing her. You could see the power imbalance, you know? It was hard to watch. Another witness chimed in. She handled it so well, calm, collected, professional. And him? He lost his cool in front of everyone. Not exactly the image law enforcement needs right now. Back at the station, Greg couldn't escape the reality of what was happening. Phones buzzed incessantly as officers scrolled through updates, sharing memes and articles poking fun at the situation. Some laughed nervously, unsure whether to sympathize with Greg or distance themselves from the fallout. Others avoided looking at him altogether, pretending to focus on their screens instead. Greg tried to act normal, keeping his head down and avoiding eye contact. But deep down, he knew he couldn't hide forever. The truth was out there, plain for everyone to see. All it would take was one person connecting the dots, and then everything would come crashing down. By late afternoon, rumors reached Maya herself. As she settled into her new office, unpacking files and getting acquainted with her responsibilities, an aide knocked softly on the door. "Chief?" the aide said hesitantly. "There's something you should probably see." Maya raised an eyebrow, curious but calm. "What is it?" The aide handed her a tablet, pulling up the viral video. Maya watched silently, her expression unreadable. When the clip ended, she set the device down and leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. "Well," she said finally, her tone measured, "this complicates things." Complicates things. That was putting it mildly. On one hand, she understood the weight of the moment. As the newly appointed chief, she represented hope for progress and reform. To let such behavior slide, even unintentionally, would undermine everything she stood for. On the other hand, she wasn't interested in revenge or public shaming. Justice to her wasn't about tearing people down. It was about lifting them up. Still, the situation couldn't be ignored. Word had spread too far, too fast. If left unaddressed, it would fester, creating divisions within the department and eroding trust among the public. Something had to be done, and soon. As the day wore on, Greg found himself pacing outside the commissioner's office, rehearsing what he might say if called in. Should he apologize, defend himself, or just accept whatever consequences came his way? Each option felt heavier than the last, leaving him more anxious with every passing minute. Little did he know, Maya was already thinking about how to handle the situation, not just for his sake, but for the sake of the entire department. Because in moments like these, leadership wasn't just about making decisions, it was about finding balance, and Maya was determined to get it right. The next morning, the air inside the police station felt heavier than usual. Officers moved through the halls with a mix of unease and curiosity, whispering in hushed tones about what might happen next. The viral video of the courthouse incident had only gained more traction overnight, sparking debates on social media, news outlets, and even local radio shows. Everyone was talking about it, including those within the department. For Greg Thompson, the day started with a knot in his stomach that wouldn't loosen. He arrived early, hoping to avoid attention. but instead found himself surrounded by sideways glances and awkward silences. Some colleagues offered weak smiles as they passed him in the hallway, while others avoided eye contact altogether. It was clear, everyone knew, and no one quite knew how to act around him. Meanwhile, Chief Maya Rivers began her first official day in her new role. She spent the morning reviewing files, meeting key members of her team, and mapping out priorities for the weeks ahead. But despite her busy schedule, she couldn't ignore the elephant in the room. The courthouse incident loomed large, not just because of its public nature, but because it represented everything she hoped to change within the department. By mid-morning, Maya called an all-hands meeting. Word spread quickly, and soon the briefing room was packed with officers from every rank. The atmosphere was tense. Some leaned forward anxiously, while others slouched in their chairs, avoiding direct eye contact. When Maya stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. Her presence commanded respect, not because of intimidation, but because of the quiet strength she exuded. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I know there's been a lot of talk lately, about me, about this department, and about recent events involving one of our own." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Let me be clear. I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame. My goal is to lead us toward progress, fairness, and accountability. That starts today." Her gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Greg before moving on. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the weight of her stare even though it lasted only a second. "What happened at the courthouse yesterday shouldn't define who we are as a department or as individuals," she continued. "But it does highlight important issues we need to address. Bias, privilege, power dynamics, they exist everywhere, including here. Ignoring them won't make them go away. Instead, we must confront them head-on." As she spoke, Maya's tone remained measured, never veering into anger or accusation. She wasn't there to shame anyone. She was there to challenge them, to push them to do better. "This isn't just about one person or one moment," she said. "It's about recognizing patterns and working together to break them. We serve a diverse community, and if we want their trust, we have to earn it every single day." Her speech resonated deeply with many in the room. Heads nodded in agreement, and a few officers exchanged approving looks. But for Greg, each word felt like a spotlight shining directly on him. His palms grew sweaty, and he clenched his fists under the table, trying to steady himself. He didn't dare look up, afraid of meeting anyone's gaze. When the meeting ended, Maya requested a private conversation with Greg. The summons came via a junior officer, delivered quietly but firmly. "Chief Rivers would like to see you in her office when you're ready." Greg's heart sank. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. For a brief second, he considered calling in sick or finding some excuse to delay the inevitable. But deep down he knew running wouldn't solve anything. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to walk down the hall to her office. He knocked softly on the door. "Come in," Maya called from inside. Stepping into her office, Greg felt smaller than he ever had before. The space was modest but professional, with framed certificates hanging on the walls and stacks of paperwork neatly organized on the desk. Maya sat behind it, her expression neutral but not unkind. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Greg lowered himself into the seat, perching on the edge as if ready to bolt at any moment. His hands trembled slightly, so he clasped them tightly in his lap to hide his nerves. "I think we both know why we're here," Maya began, cutting straight to the point. "What happened at the courthouse yesterday? It wasn't okay. Not for you, not for me, and certainly not for the people who witnessed it." Greg swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Chief, She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Let me finish. I'm not interested in tearing you down. What I am interested in is understanding and helping you understand why it happened. Because unless we address the root cause, it'll keep happening. Maybe not to me, but to someone else, and that's unacceptable." Her words hit home. Greg felt a lump rise in his throat, guilt washing over him in waves. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't meant to escalate things, but the truth was he had. Whether out of pride, frustration, or misplaced authority, he'd let his emotions get the better of him. There was no denying it. "I messed up," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what else to say. I saw you standing there, and something about the situation, I don't know. It got under my skin. I shouldn't have reacted the way I did." Maya studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his expression. After a long pause, she nodded. "Okay, thank you for saying that. Accountability is the first step. Now comes the hard part, learning from it." She slid a folder across the desk toward him. Inside were details about a series of mandatory training sessions focused on bias awareness, de-escalation techniques, and community engagement. "You'll attend these sessions regularly," she explained. "In addition, I'm assigning you to work closely with our community outreach team. You'll spend time volunteering at local events, listening to residents' concerns, and rebuilding trust where it's been broken." Greg flipped through the pages, his mind racing. The tasks seemed daunting, almost overwhelming. But at the same time, he couldn't deny that they made sense. If he truly wanted to grow, if he wanted to prove that he could be better, this was his chance. "There's one more thing," Maya added, her tone softening slightly. "I'll be keeping a close eye on your progress. If you commit fully to this process, I believe you can turn things around. But if you resist or fail to meet expectations—" She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Greg nodded, slowly, understanding the stakes. "I'll do whatever it takes," he promised, his voice steadier now. "I owe it to you, to the department, and to myself." Maya leaned back in her chair, studying him for another moment before speaking again. "Good. Then we'll start tomorrow. Take today to reflect, and come back ready to begin anew." As Greg left her office, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that he hadn't been fired outright, and dread at the mountain of work ahead of him. But amid the swirling emotions, one thing stood out. Maya hadn't written him off. She'd given him a lifeline, a chance to redeem himself. And for the first time in days, Greg allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, he could rise to the occasion. The weeks that followed were anything but easy for Greg Thompson. Every day felt like a test, a chance to prove he was serious about change, or a reminder of how far he still had to go. The training sessions Chief Maya Rivers assigned him weren't just lectures. They were deeply uncomfortable dives into topics he'd never fully confronted before. Bias awareness workshops forced him to examine his own assumptions and question why he reacted the way he did in certain situations. De-escalation classes pushed him to rethink his approach to conflict, teaching him strategies that prioritized calmness over control. At first, Greg struggled. Sitting in a room with colleagues, some of whom shot him knowing looks, made him feel exposed and vulnerable. He squirmed in his seat during discussions about systemic racism and privilege, unsure of what to say or how to contribute. More than once, he caught himself wanting to argue or defend his actions at the courthouse, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the memory of Maya's steady gaze when she spoke to him in her office, or maybe it was the realization that arguing wouldn't help him grow. It would only dig him deeper into the hole he'd created. Slowly, though, things began to shift. One session stood out in particular, a panel discussion featuring community members who had experienced negative interactions with law enforcement. A middle-aged woman recounted being pulled over repeatedly for no apparent reason, her voice trembling as she described the fear those encounters instilled in her teenage son. An older man shared how officers often assumed he was homeless or up to no good simply because of where he lived. Their stories hit Greg hard, not because they were directed at him personally, but because he recognized shades of his own behavior in their accounts. After the panel ended, Greg lingered behind, hesitant but determined. "Can I ask you something?" he said to the woman who'd spoken about her son. She looked surprised but nodded. Do you think cops can ever fix this? Or are we too far gone?" She studied him for a moment, then sighed. It's not about fixing everything overnight, she replied. It's about showing us you're willing to try, listening without getting defensive, admitting when you're wrong. That's a start. Her words stuck with him long after the session ended. They became a kind of mantra, guiding his efforts moving forward. He threw himself into the work, determined to show, not just tell, that he was committed to change. Community outreach proved equally challenging. Greg spent hours volunteering at local events, from neighborhood cleanups to youth mentorship programs. At first, people eyed him warily, unsure of what to make of his presence. Some outright ignored him while others muttered under their breath. But Greg didn't let it deter him. Instead, he focused on small gestures, lending a hand to set up chairs, offering to carry supplies, striking up conversations with anyone willing to talk. One Saturday morning, he found himself at a community garden project, planting flowers alongside residents. A young boy, no older than 10, approached him cautiously, clutching a trowel in one hand and a packet of seeds in the other. "Are you really a cop?" the boy asked, his brow furrowed. Greg knelt down to meet him at eye level. "Yeah, I am," he replied gently. "Why do you ask?" the boy shrugged. "My mom says cops aren't always nice." Greg winced inwardly but kept his expression neutral. "Well, your mom's right sometimes," he admitted. "Some cops make mistakes, but I'm trying to be better. What do you think? Can I earn your trust?" The boy tilted his head, considering the question. Then, without another word, he handed Greg the trowel and pointed to an empty patch of soil. "You can plant these," he said matter-of-factly. For Greg, that simple act felt monumental. It wasn't forgiveness, it was a chance, and he clung to it tightly, pouring every ounce of effort into proving he deserved it. Back at the station, attitudes toward Greg began to shift. Some officers still gave him side-eye, whispering behind closed doors about how much trouble he'd caused. But others started noticing his dedication, quietly acknowledging the changes in his demeanor. During roll calls, he listened more intently and offered thoughtful input instead of dominating conversations. On patrol, he took extra care to explain procedures clearly and respectfully, ensuring people understood their rights. Even Maya noticed the transformation. During one of their check-ins, she leaned back in her chair and studied him carefully. "You've come a long way," she said finally. "I won't lie. It hasn't been easy watching you struggle through this process. But I see real growth. Keep going." Her words meant more to Greg than she probably realized. For so long, he'd defined himself by his rank, his authority, his reputation. Now he was learning to define himself by something else entirely: humility. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. As months passed, Greg's journey became part of the larger narrative of reform within the department. Under Maya's leadership, sweeping changes took root. Officers participated in regular workshops designed to challenge biases and build empathy. Community relations improved significantly, earning praise from local leaders and residents alike. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild. Not completely, but enough to create momentum. And through it all, Greg remained a symbol of possibility. Not because he was perfect, he wasn't, but because he showed that even someone who had made grave mistakes could choose to do better. His story served as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope, reminding everyone that accountability isn't the end of the road. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. A year had passed since the courthouse incident, and the world inside the police department and outside it felt like a different place. Change doesn't happen overnight, but steady progress leaves its mark. The once tense atmosphere in the station had softened, replaced by a sense of purpose and accountability. Officers walked taller, not because they were untouchable, but because they carried themselves with a newfound awareness. They knew their actions mattered, not just to their colleagues, but to the people they served. Greg Thompson stood at the back of the briefing room, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. Today was special. Chief Maya Rivers had called an all-staff meeting to celebrate milestones reached over the past year: improved community relations, reduced complaints against officers, and innovative programs that bridged gaps between law enforcement and residents. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and everyone knew it. When Maya stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. She wore a calm smile as she addressed the group. "This has been a challenging year, for all of us," she began. "But challenge often brings growth, and I'm proud to say we've grown together." Her eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Greg before continuing. "Today, we're here to recognize achievements both big and small, but more importantly, we're here to remind ourselves why this work matters. Every decision we make shapes how people see us and how they feel about justice itself." The crowd nodded along, some jotting notes while others simply listened intently. Then Maya gestured toward Greg. "There's someone I'd like to invite to join me up here, a person whose journey embodies what we've been striving for." Greg froze. His heart raced as every head in the room turned to look at him. He hesitated, unsure if he'd heard correctly. When Maya motioned again, he forced himself to move, his legs feeling heavy with nerves. As he approached the podium, whispers rippled through the room. Some officers exchanged knowing glances while others sat quietly, curious about what would come next. "Officer Thompson," Maya said warmly, turning to face him as he stood beside her. "You've faced one of the toughest challenges anyone can face, looking in the mirror and deciding to change. Over the past year, you've worked tirelessly, not just to improve yourself, but to contribute to the greater good of this department and our community." Greg swallowed hard, his throat dry. He hadn't expected this moment. All he could think about was the weight of her words, their kindness, their truth. For so long, he'd defined himself by his mistakes. Now, standing here under the spotlight, he realized something profound. Redemption isn't given, it's earned. "I didn't do it alone," Greg said finally, his voice shaky but sincere. "Chief Rivers gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. My colleagues supported me even when I doubted myself. And the community, well, they taught me patience and grace." He paused, taking a deep breath. "What happened at the courthouse? Last year was wrong, plain and simple. I let pride and bias cloud my judgment. But instead of punishing me, Chief Rivers challenged me to grow. She showed me that real strength lies in admitting fault and striving to be better." The room erupted into applause, soft at first but growing louder as officers rose to their feet. Greg blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the support surrounding him. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the future of the department. Later that evening, reporters gathered outside the station for a press conference. Cameras flashed as Maya and Greg stood side by side, answering questions about the department's transformation. One journalist asked Greg directly, "How does it feel to have gone from being criticized to celebrated?" Greg thought carefully before responding. "It's humbling," he admitted. "I don't want anyone to forget what happened, I sure won't. That day changed me. It taught me that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And it reminded me that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility." Maya chimed in, adding, "True leadership means giving people opportunities to rise above their mistakes." Officer Thompson has shown remarkable resilience and commitment to growth. He represents what's possible when we choose accountability over denial. As the press conference wrapped up, Greg lingered near the podium, watching as reporters filed out. Maya joined him, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "But remember, this isn't the end. Keep pushing forward, for yourself and for everyone counting on us." Greg nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." In the weeks that followed, news outlets highlighted the department's story, focusing not just on Greg's redemption arc but on the broader culture shift within the force. Residents who had once distrusted law enforcement began attending town halls and participating in community events. Officers reported feeling more connected to the neighborhoods they patrolled, fostering relationships built on mutual respect rather than fear. For Greg, life settled into a rhythm of purpose. He continued volunteering, mentoring new recruits, and advocating for reforms. Each day brought reminders of how far he'd come and how much farther he still wanted to go. Mistakes shaped him, yes, but so did forgiveness, hard work, and the belief that people could change. As Maya often reminded, her team justice wasn't about perfection. It was about striving to do better even when it was hard. And in that striving, Greg found not just redemption, but hope. Hope that trust could be rebuilt, hope that hearts could heal, and hope that together they could create a future worth believing in.